Hello, my witches and ghouls. Welcome back to my channel, A Weird Witch. In today's video, we are talking about La Voisin. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm sorry to all the French people who might be offended by how I pronounce most of these names. I heard La Voisin in a podcast or two podcasts when I was researching this. And that's how they said it, and that's how they said they researched it and how they found out it to be said. So I'm going to say it like that. This might be a two-parter just because I haven't finished my research. So this video is going to go up at the very beginning of March, and then part 2 might be the next week, like the following week. And I'm still going to try and keep on my schedule of like bi-weekly. So technically it'll be the 1st and 3rd week of March will be like official videos. So part 2 is going to come out the following week. So it'll be week 2 in March, which should still give me enough time to make my official 2nd video in March. Also, if you hear stuff, it's because it's very windy outside and the flag's blowing really hard and the wind chimes are blowing extremely hard as well. So if you hear that, sorry, I can't help that. That's nature for you. In part 1, we are going to be talking about her early life, her clientele, what she did for a living, and generally what people thought of her. So let's get into it. Her real official name is Catherine Monvoisin. So who was Catherine Monvoisin, or La Voisin? It was her, I guess, general title in the streets of Paris. She was a 17th century French entrepreneur, astrologer, philanthropist, a priestess, and an alleged witch. She grew up poor on the streets of France, to then living in luxury, and later to her eventual burning on crimes of witchcraft and helping the Sun King's mistress. This is the story of Catherine Monvoisin. So in her beginnings, there was not much. She was born in France in around 1640-ish. There's not exactly like a time, like a specific date that we have about her birth. All we know is that she was born very poor, and about around age 9 is when we start seeing her entrepreneurship and her reading fortunes for all kinds of people, but most notably nobles, like people of noble birth. So in her early life, she married Antoine Monvoisin, who at different times had been a jewelry merchant and a silk merchant. And about the time when they got married, Catherine found out that her husband was not the best. He was a bad businessman. He was bad at keeping up with his finances. He was also very abusive toward Catherine. Although they still had 10 children together, which one of them, who was Marguerite Monvoisin, who will be important later on in the story, probably in part 2. But yeah, she quickly found out that her husband, Antoine, was very bad at business, and they were almost back into poverty, and she was not about that life. She was like, no, I'm going to take over the finances, and I'm going to start my own business, which pretty much was fortune telling. She also became a midwife, and she also had some medical knowledge, of course, to become a midwife. And she also provided abortions for young ladies of all classes who could not afford to have a child. She also, sometimes, I would believe, also did secret adoptions for these ladies who already had the children, who already bared these children, but still did not want them. And also, since she was in an abusive relationship with her husband, she took on many lovers. Which one was called Lesage? I believe that's how you pronounce it. Or Lesage, or whoever. I'm going to say Lesage, which Lesage means the wise one, and he was considered a magician. And he at one point buried a sheep's heart in her garden, which she promptly made him dig it back up. And what Lesage was possibly wanting to do was to cause the death of her husband, in which case her husband at one point told Catherine that if he had ever died, that he was wanting his body to be autopsied, so that if he was potentially murdered, all fingers would point to her based on her services. Being she threatened to poison him at one point, and he was like, "You're not going to get me out that easily, even though you have all these lovers, and you potentially want to marry one of them. You're not getting my money." She definitely became very well known for her clairvoyancy and her fortune readings. She practiced chiromancy, which is palm reading, a name for palm reading, and face reading as well. At one point, she claimed these gifts were from God, because at one point, a priest from St. Vincent de Paul's order and the congregation of the mission questioned her abilities in 1665. And she was let go after she explained her abilities to them and did an impressive performance for them, which we don't exactly know what this performance was, or at least I couldn't find out how she performed her gifts for these men in power. But they were like, "All right, you're legit. You're not a scam artist, and we're just gonna let you go." Alrighty. Which witchcraft was definitely I want to say it was illegal at that point in time, as well as giving abortions and stuff. But the fact that it came from God, it was okay in their eyes, which, it's all witchcraft. But, oh well. After that, she actually soon gained fame and fortune. And she even used her wealth to adorn herself in expensive robes. And one is detailed saying she wore a crimson red velvet robe embroidered with images of eagles in golden thread. Which sounds very elegant and, like, oh, I'm very rich, I can show off my wealth to you. But she wasn't of noble birth, she was just a very wealthy woman who was an entrepreneur at the time. She did very well for herself and for her family, and she had an envious colleague who described how before she got up every morning, there were folks waiting to see her, and throughout the rest of the day, she was with more people. After that, she kept open house in the evening with violins playing and was always making merry. She loved, I want to say extravagance, she loved to have the ambiance of her work. So she was definitely one of those people who believed that the ambiance played a significant role into not her abilities, but the way that she conducted herself, and the atmosphere would help people get into it and herself. Like a lot of practitioners today, like, of course you want the aesthetic of witchcraft, whatever you feel like witchcraft is to you, however you feel the ambiance in the place should be. It gets you into that headspace, and it helps you focus more on what you're trying to achieve. And a lot of her clientele were actually women. She did have some men who came to her, but a lot of them were women, not only for the occult and esoteric side, but also the more earthly matters, such as abortions and stuff. And she also sold a lot of like beauty enhancements, like lotions and powders and all that kind of stuff to help her women clientele feel more beautiful and, sell more things. And some of these women who came to her wanted the men in their lives to either die, become their husbands, or give them things. And she sold potions to these women to help with these affairs. And she also opened up a home for unwed mothers seeking refuge. And a lot of them were seeking abortions. And some of them, like I said earlier, had already born these children, but still did not want them. So sometimes they were brought in to be adopted out secretively to other families, which, you know, it's not a bad thing, is these mothers who gave up these children, just like as modern society today, maybe they couldn't afford to give their child the best life that they thought that they could give, so they adopted them out. Or before that the baby was born, they would, you know, just get rid of them, which is not the best term to use, but what else are you gonna do? It was very scandalous back then, and still scandalous now in some families, to have a baby out of wedlock, which kind of stupid to me, but it's societal pressure and all these things. It's still very stupid. And later on, these children, these unborn babies, were used as sacrifices in black masses that she would perform with actual priests from the Catholic Church. They were called like renegade priests, I believe. And they were sacrifices to the Dark Lord, Satan, the devil, whoever you want to commodify it with. And this will conclude part 1. In part 2, we're going to be going over how she became from a mystic to a murderer within the affair of the poisons, which was a whole freaking ordeal to deal with, from the king and the court and the people of France and all this stuff. So I will see y'all in part 2. Bye, my witches and ghouls. I'll see y'all later. Bye.